This is the Draw My Life of the Berlin Wall and of President John F. Kennedy. After World War II ended in 1945, the Allied peace conferences in Yalta and Potsdam determined the fate of Germany's territories. During these conferences, Germany was split into 4 Allied occupation zones, split between the Soviet Union, the United States, Great Britain, and France. The eastern part of Germany went to the Soviet Union, while the western part went to the United States, Great Britain, and later on France. As you can see, Berlin was located entirely within the Soviet part of the country. It sat about 100 miles from the border between the eastern and western occupation zones. However, during the Yalta and Potsdam conferences, the city was also split into similar sectors as the rest of the country was. The Soviets took the eastern half, while the Allies took the western. This 4-way occupation of Berlin began in June of 1945. The official purpose of the Berlin Wall was to keep Western fascists from entering East Germany and undermining the socialist state, but primarily it served the objective of stemming mass defections from East and West. The existence of West Berlin stuck deep within the communist East Germany community. So the Russians began maneuvering to drive out the United States, Britain, and France out of the city completely. In 1948, a Soviet blockade of Western Berlin aimed to starve the Western Allies out of the city. Instead of retreating, however, the United States and its allies supplied their sectors of the city from the air. This effort, known as the Berlin Airlift, lasted more than a year and delivered more than 2.3 million tons of food, fuel, and other goods to West Berlin. The Soviets called off the blockade in 1949. After the Soviets called off the blockade, there was a relatively calm decade until there was a space race in 1958. The Soviet Union found themselves embarrassed due to the endless flow of refugees from the east to the west. Nearly 3 million refugees, including young skilled workers and doctors, flew to the west. Summits and conferences were held but went without resolution. However, during these summits and conferences, the flood of refugees continued. In June of 1961, almost 19,000 people left the GDR through Berlin. The next month, 30,000 fled. In the first 11 days of August, 16,000 East Germans crossed the border into West Berlin. The largest number of refugees ever to leave East Germany in one day was 2,400 people. On the night of August 12th, Khrushchev gave the East government permission to stop the flow of immigrants by closing its border for good. Within 2 weeks, the East German army, police force, and volunteer construction workers had completed a makeshift barbed wire concrete block wall considered the Berlin Wall that divided one side of the city from the other. Before the wall was built, Berliners were able to move between both sides of the city freely, as they were able to work, shop, and go to the theater and movies. However, after the wall was built, it became impossible to get from East to West Berlin, except through one of the 3 checkpoints. The 3 main checkpoints were Checkpoint Alpha, Checkpoint Bravo, and Checkpoint Charlie. However, eventually 12 checkpoints were built along the wall by the GDR. At each of the checkpoints, East German soldiers screened diplomats and other officials before they were allowed to enter or leave. Except under very special circumstances, travelers from East and West Berlin were rarely allowed across the border. The construction of the Berlin Wall did stop the flow of refugees from east to west, and it did defuse the crisis over Berlin. Kennedy urged the United States Information Agency to exploit the propaganda advantage of the wall to the maximum. Because of this, it was an enormous plus for the West and an enormous minus for the communist nations. He said that everything must be done in terms of pictures, to describe what a dreadful thing this was in terms of bottling up a whole nation and preventing them from leaving. Because Kennedy's quiet public reaction to the wall didn't readdress West Berlin's sagging morale, he had dispatched Vice President Johnson to demonstrate the U.S. concern and resolve and ordered 1,600 American troops to travel down to the Autobahn. Because President Kennedy was worried that something might go wrong with the high-risk move, he insisted on being kept informed of every detail of the convoy's progress. The troops arrived safely, and the Berlin Wall was viewed with some reason as a crisis in West Berlin and West Germany, but it did not turn into a big problem for Kennedy. During the construction of the Berlin Wall, President Kennedy famously said, "A wall is a hell of a lot better than a war," demonstrating his dissatisfaction with the construction of the wall. The Berlin Wall was 12 feet tall and 4 feet wide, with a reinforced concrete that was topped with an enormous pipe that made climbing over the wall nearly impossible. The area behind the wall on the East German side was dubbed as the Death Strip, as there was floodlights, vicious dogs, tripwire machine guns, and patrolling soldiers with orders to shoot on sight. Overall, 171 people were killed trying to get over, under, or around the Berlin Wall. However, escape from East Germany was not impossible. From 1961 to 1989, more than 5,000 East Germans managed to cross the border by jumping out of windows adjacent to the wall or climbing over the barbed wire. On November 9, 1989, the Cold War began to lessen across Eastern Europe, and the spokesman for East Berlin's Communist Party announced a change for his city's relations with the West. Beginning at midnight that day, he said citizens of the GDR were free to cross the country's borders. East and West Berliners flocked to the wall, drinking beer and champagne, and chanting, "Tore off," or "Open the gate." At midnight, they flooded through the checkpoints. More than 2 million people from East Berlin visited West Berlin that weekend to participate in a celebration that one journalist wrote, "the greatest street party in the history of the world." People used hammers and picks to knock away chunks of the wall. The reunification of East and West Germany was made official on October 3, 1990, almost 1 year after the fall of the Berlin Wall.